Sometimes a single comment online isn't just a comment. It's like a key that unlocks two totally different worlds. Today, we're going to look at one of those comments and the two completely different lenses people use to understand it. One sees straight up racism. The other sees a huge, complicated religious and historical conflict. All right, let's get into it. So it all kicked off with this statement from the conservative activist Charlie Kirk. He was questioning the qualifications of several prominent Black women, and yeah, the comment just lit up the internet, sparking this massive firestorm of debate. The first and most immediate reaction was pretty straightforward. This is racist. You had commentators like Tanya Taco and many others who basically said that Kirk's words are tapping into a really long, ugly history of questioning Black people's intelligence to keep them out of certain spaces. The idea here is that the statement implies some kind of natural weakness, and that these high-level jobs should really belong to someone else. It's a direct analysis of racial bias, seeing the comment not as some random slip-up, but as part of a much bigger pattern of coded language. But then, a whole different take emerged, and this is where we get our second lens for this explainer. It's framed in a really unusual way, inside a fictional book called Thank You, Charlie. And get this, it uses a hypothetical assassination of Kirk, not to promote violence, of course, but as a literary jumping-off point to unpack a much, much bigger picture of the world. And this is where the book really flips the script. It makes the argument that the old, overt kind of racism, with hoods and explicit hate, it never actually went away. Instead, it just put on a disguise. It cloaked itself in more acceptable forms, like Christian nationalism or certain kinds of political language. So from this point of view, the racism didn't vanish. It just changed its clothes. So, building on that idea, the author launches this massive critique of American power structures. And they start right at the very top, with the political system itself. So according to this book, the Democratic Party is an expert at giving these big, beautiful speeches and making all sorts of promises to Black communities. But at the end of the day, it says they're left with empty hands. The claim here is that Black suffering is basically used to get votes, but without any real power or actual progress ever being delivered. And the Republican Party doesn't get a pass here either. It's painted as the other side of the very same coin. It's accused of actively trying to undo even the small wins of stripping away civil rights and taking down protections. The real point in this analysis is the idea that the ground is intentionally kept unstable, so that Black communities can never truly build anything lasting on it. So the book's ultimate conclusion is that both parties are just two faces of one big, corrupted system. The main idea is that the promise of liberty and justice for, and this is the text's specific phrasing, the freedmen of America, has been stolen by this two-party illusion of choice. And the critique doesn't just stop with political parties. It also points a finger at powerful lobbying groups, and it specifically calls out AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. It argues that groups like this secretly influence politicians and even write legislation. The claim being made is that policy isn't about justice anymore. It's dictated by dollars, and the whole system is corrupted because of it. Now, this worldview isn't just about what's happening right now. It actually goes way back, and it involves a pretty radical reinterpretation of some foundational American stories and even some key historical figures. Okay, think about that classic American idea, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? Well, this book challenges that head-on. It says the problem was never about a lack of effort. The problem is that after 400 years of stolen labor, Black Americans were systematically denied the boots themselves, the capital, the property, the opportunity that they would have needed to even start climbing. This part is really interesting. The book completely reclaims the term Uncle Tom. So forget the popular image of a weak, subservient person who betrays his own people. The text argues he was actually a hero, a figure of quiet strength and moral courage. It says he used strategic self-sacrifice to protect his community, and it draws a sharp contrast between him and the Sambo archetype, who would just try to please the masters for his own personal gain. Okay, so what is holding this entire sweeping analysis together? All this stuff about politics and history, what's the why behind it all? Well, it turns out it's all rooted in a very specific theological foundation. Here's the absolute core belief. The author argues for total, literal obedience to God's written law, the Torah, over any and all man-made religious traditions. It's not about what feels right. It's not about what your church does. It's about following the commandments exactly as they are written down, period. And you can see this core conflict play out really clearly here. On the left, you have what the text identifies as a direct commandment from God in the Torah. And on the right, you have what it calls man's tradition. So from this perspective, things we take for granted, like going to church on Sunday instead of observing a seventh-day Sabbath, aren't just harmless customs. They're seen as direct acts of disobedience. This quote right here really gets to the absolute heart of this worldview. It's saying that all the other lines we draw to divide ourselves, political party, race, nationality, all of that is just man-made noise. It's a distraction. According to this text, the only division that actually matters to the Most High is the one between obedience and disobedience to his law. So after all that complexity, all the history, the politics, the theology, this entire massive argument gets boiled down to one very simple, very focused final choice. Everything else gets stripped away. According to this text, it all comes down to this. All of humanity throughout all of history is walking on one of two paths. Path one is obedience. You follow God's commandments, and that leads to life. Path two is disobedience. You follow man-made traditions and sin, and that leads to death. That's it. There's no third option, no middle ground. And that brings us full circle. We started with one single viral comment from Charlie Kirk, and now we've seen it through two profoundly different lenses. One lens sees a direct, clear-cut case of racism. The other looks at that exact same comment and sees it as just a tiny symptom, a ripple on the surface of a vast, ongoing spiritual war between obedience and disobedience. And that really leaves us with a final and pretty crucial question to think about. How much of what we see and argue about online, what we think of as a simple disagreement, is actually a fundamental clash between two entirely different, maybe even incompatible worldviews? When we debate, are we even living in the same reality?
Bruh.